Welcome to PlaceTech Residential. Thank you for joining this morning. I hope you've all grabbed your coffees and enjoyed your first taste of networking in the other room. I know some of you have joined us for other events already in the last few weeks, and welcome back. To others new to Remo, I hope you're finding your feet. This is our new platform. We love it. It's more interactive, more useful for networking and getting business activity going. We've had some great anecdotes from the last few weeks of people getting invited onto opportunities because of meetings they've had here. So it's nice to introduce a sort of human aspect to these video events. I'd like to thank our partners today for organising this event with PlaceTech, Bruntwood Works, Molcom, Mills and Reeve, and Node. In terms of format, there will be two halves with networking in between and at the end. The networking room is where you can join tables, video chat with each other, move between tables by double clicking on the table you want to go to. If you want to take a conversation private, you can. Just see if there's a table for two available on either side, left or right, and suggest meeting there and double click on that table and away you go. There's also private messaging in the chat function at the toolbar at the bottom of the screen in the networking room if you want to swap numbers or suggest times for follow-ups, emails, etc. You can search for guests by name in that chat box, and you can scroll up and down the participants. You can also see on the right-hand side of this screen here as well. We also have a virtual exhibitor today, GBuilder, 3D visualization tool we've written about on PlaceTech. Check their area out, click on their logo. They've got a great video that explains what they do. And some of the guys from there are attending as well. You might see them on the tables. A handy tip for networking, you can drag the floor plan around and you can zoom in and out to help you locate what you need and see people. You can see their details when you click on somebody's face if they've created their profile, which is a good thing to do. You can also click on the tiles button at the bottom to enlarge the video frames and make it a bit easier to see people. And lastly, we've also got a short video guide in the other room to getting the most out of the networking, which you'll find at the top, just to the left of the little green room for speakers. We will be recording today's event, and that will be shared with you afterwards as part of your ticket, so you don't have to frantically make notes all the way through. So on with today's content. What is the future of residential property? Has modular finally gone mainstream? What does the future of care and senior living look like? Who is disrupting the rental market with new models and technology? How does a future thinking developer go about choosing their tech partners? PlaceTech is all about understanding the trends that are reshaping the future of the property industry. And we're privileged to have a great lineup of experts today to share their insights into the things they're passionate about. So let's get started. If I can ask our first panel to turn your cameras on, please, we'll get underway. Okay, thank you. Please, can you start by introducing yourselves when I say your name? We'll start with Martin.
Morning, thanks, Paul. So I'm Martin Prince Parrott. I'm design manager for Cordia Black Swan. We are a Birmingham-based developer with an international presence throughout Europe, particularly Eastern Europe, in markets like Spain, Bulgaria, Romania, and Hungary. So our focus is predominantly mixed-use residential, but we're really open-minded about the trends that we're seeing currently in the marketplace and responding to those. So it's an exciting time, and yeah, thanks for having me.
No, you're welcome. Thank you for giving your time up today. Samantha?
Thanks, Paul. Good morning, everyone. I'm Samantha Rowland. I head up the Senior Living Division for Savills. I have a UK and European remit, and my background is in healthcare. So I've, over the years, done everything from primary care, long-term care, and obviously the transition into senior living is sort of a natural move.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks. And Dan?
Morning, everybody. My name's Dan Pollard. I'm the Chief Manufacturing Officer at a company called RD Modular Homes. We're a modular housing manufacturer based in Liverpool. We use a volumetric construction method to deliver homes of our homes are more cost efficient and sustainable than conventional methods. We established in 2017. We have a factory in Speak, and we're looking to open a second factory by the end of this year. And our projection is in excess of 2,000 homes per year out of both factories.
Wow, that's brilliant. Thank you. Judith?
Hi, thanks. So my name is Judith Sykes. I'm a Senior Director in Expedition Engineering, where I sort of lead the housing and regeneration team, looking at sort of infrastructure planning, but also working with house builders on sort of their modular technology and how you get that to market, and really advising public and private sector clients on how they build to meet the sort of environmental standards, zero carbon, and also sort of meet their placemaking objectives. I'm also part of the Igloo team, the Home in 2030 competition. So we're one of 6 shortlisted teams for that competition that's been run by MHCLG.
Yeah, absolutely. Congratulations on getting that far. It's a great result. And so Dan, if I could start with you, we've seen a lot of headlines over the years about modular, and it really does seem to be getting some tangible results now. You've had a huge win with Borough of Greenwich in London, £300 million contract over 5 years. Is this the moment when modular has gone mainstream?
We hope so. I think there's still that obviously that trepidation regarding off-site construction with traditional build. I believe the methods that we use, the speed that we build in, a bit of an oversight that we have raw material coming to our factory within 4 days. A finished house is complete, as carpets, kitchens, tiled, and then we're on site within 8 hours. I do believe, I'd say, the perception of modular or off-site is a tin shack on a building site somewhere. Over the past 10 years, we've come on leaps and bounds, especially using the tech side of it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And Judith, is that part of your sort of design ethos with off-site manufacturing and flexible components in your work?
Yeah, very much so. And I think sort of whether it's mainstreamed, I think is still uncertain, but it's certainly a tipping point. And I suppose where we're working with is particularly within the public sector, working with clients to try and build their knowledge and understanding what the supply chain can offer in terms of modular, and making sure that we don't constrain modular solutions at that outset in terms of, planning requirements and parameter plans to enable modular solutions come forward through the procurement process. And definitely the sort of flexibility and adaptability that modular solutions is a core part of what we're proposing for the Home of 2030. And I think trying to see modular as a way of all more customer orientated housing, and so how does kit parts approach actually suit people so that they can customize and have more bespoke as well housing solutions.
Yeah, that's right. And
that are more anchored in the places as well.
Yeah. Martin, is that something that you would consider or have considered in terms of your own projects from a developer's perspective with the off-site manufacturing?
It's something we're looking into. I think that I guess the only areas of concern for us are probably the lack of standardization. But I must say at this point, the advantages are starting to outweigh the risks as it stands. It is becoming mainstream, and I think for us probably would like to see more modular schemes, and we'd like to see more modular schemes that have been in situ for a lot longer, just to see how they develop and how they settle, how interfaces with the insurance companies and lifestyle and adaptability and flexibility, all of those things, how they actually work out in practice, because there can be quite a lot of difference depending on the kind of asset that you're developing. So if we work with a funder, they will eventually be purchasing that product. And so from their perspective, they want to know that the building will operate as well as the first day that they moved in. And that's particularly a concern for build-to-rent operators and funders, because they will be looking to operate those assets over a really, really long period. And there is an aversion to fixing something that they don't feel is particularly broken. I think from our perspective as a developer, the quality aspect that modular offers and the integrated nature, as well as the health and safety advantages as well of being able to have things happen in a factory rather than on site, and what that means depending on how things play out with COVID is attractive enough for us to be looking at it seriously.
Yeah, and when you say that about standardization or perceived lack of, what do you mean by that?
Standards of performance, standards of warranty, the supply chain within the marketplace being sufficiently represented by people who know what they're doing with modular, and how they interface with it as well. So there are different forms. I'm sure Dan will be able to talk in greater detail, but there are different forms of modular and different degrees. So everything from modular frame buildings where everything else then becomes in situ, to full turnkey facade, windows, doors, services, the lot. So it's quite complex. There's one word, but it's quite complex.
Yeah, thank you. Dan, do you want to respond to any of the points Martin's made?
Well, especially on the quality. Obviously, for us as a company, we're BOPAS accredited, so the insurers and Lloyds Bank come down to their assessors for 6 months. They saw our products, our quality. So now the customers can now have mortgages on our homes. So they'll come down every 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, and have flash audits. We're using sustainable timbers. Our quality processes are the same, and we have that standardisation to give the client the comfort that they can sell these houses on.
Yeah, thank you. Samantha, I want to bring you in. You work very much in the sort of senior living market. We've seen a lot of reports about the demographics, people living longer, the amount of baby boomers retiring. What are you seeing out there in the market at the moment?
I think at the moment there's a distinct lack of supply, to be honest. And just to give you a couple of stats, and only 0.5% of retirees in the UK live in some form of housing with care or retirement facilities. And that's compared to, say, 5% in New Zealand and Australia and America, which is probably the most established one. And especially in America, they're very into their sort of multi-generational facilities as well. But I think here in the UK, the challenge is partly it's planning, but also finding sites and also sort of building to scale, really, to actually sort of meet the demand. And modular is something that we're hearing more and more now in the sector. People are actually looking at it because it's a way, as both Dan and Martin have said, of being on site and actually sort of delivering the product a bit quicker.
Yeah. And Judith, Yeah, I mean, you work very much on the sort of greening, the active travel, some of the buzz phrases that are coming out of the last 6 months. Have you seen an appetite from developers for doing things differently, or is it still very much a sort of fringe just for the converted, or where's that at?
I suppose we're fortunate that we do work for sort of more forward-thinking developers that do, want to integrate, do a holistic approach to use the benefits of MMC, to get the benefits from materials, to get the benefits from passive house and better quality in terms of the environmental performance, and obviously locate it within a community as well that is supporting, what you said about more active travel modes. But we are doing several pieces of research with various local authorities, and when we're looking at what's being delivered against building regulations and improvements, the majority of housing that's coming forward is barely over building regulations at a national level. So I think it's easy for me to get caught up in the excitement, thinking, yes, we're on a real change trajectory, but the rest of the market does need to catch up. And the future home standard would definitely help. It's just a shame that the code for sustainable homes went away, and now we've got to wait a bit longer for the future home standards to sort of catch up with where technology is, because we know how to deliver it, technology to deliver it. It's get the policy and then the supply chain to be able to respond to that policy directive. I think that will help accelerate.
Yeah, and are you happy with where the sort of cost is for the sustainable approach? Because a lot of developers, I don't know, rightly or wrongly, say, oh, it comes at a premium, it wouldn't be viable, we can't do it, we need to make a profit. Is that true?
There's, if you talk about simple terms about the difference between gas boilers and heat pumps, yes, there is a cost differential. But I would argue that when you look at all of the overhead or the premiums, the way in which developers procure, whatever the land value that is paid, there's all of those other things have a far bigger impact on the total viability of development than switching from gas boilers to heat pumps. But others might tell me otherwise on the panel.
Yeah, and Martin, as a developer, whether it's around sustainability or working from home, are there ways that you think developers should be changing the way they design product for the market after COVID, given what we've seen?
In short, yes, I think they should. I think we're probably on the cusp of, well, I think the sector's been disrupted, at least from our perspective. Consumer sentiment has completely shifted over the last few months, and it's been borne out by the sentiment shown in the search for particular types of property for both rental and purchase. So by far the biggest swing has been from urban core locations to, in terms of interest, urban core locations to suburban, lower density locations, and that's from apartments to houses. So the challenge, at least the way we see it, is trying to understand what people want, what our customers want, and ultimately why they're looking elsewhere for certain things. I think that city living has been at the top of many people's agendas for a long time because of all of the efficiencies that it offers. But in practice, when you take away the bars, the restaurants, the socializing, the networking, and the communities that can exist within cities, then what are you left with? And I think that the answer for too many people is not enough. And so the reason to compromise isn't there, which means that they default, and I would argue that they default to what is their natural human desire, which is for space, for proximity to green space, particularly the opportunity to exercise, the opportunity to be part of a community which is around more often, isn't transient, and to be part of something that's more in line with our values. So for us as a developer, we're trying to understand, if you don't provide that in a suburban context, how do you provide that in an urban context? And it's really about shifting the focus from integrating and designing around either the land, the site, or the building, and integrating and designing around people and lifestyle and what works for them. And I think we've seen that the companies that have really excelled in the last 15, 20 years, so whether it be Apple, whether it be Zoom, they fulfill a particular need that people have needed. And then once people realize that it's superior to everything else, then they move quite quickly to the thing that provides for them.
Yeah, that's quite right. And do you think that there will start to be more of a monetary value put on things like green space, blue space next to water, access to safe cycleways, routes? Is that going to have an impact on values for developers? It's not just a gimmick.
I think it will. I think it's a little bit hard to call because I guess the pressure has to be quite distinct for price to not be the only deciding factor. But I do think so. I mean, we already see it reflected, because if you wanted to purchase a house that's close to a park, it'll probably cost more because it's near something nice. If you want to purchase an apartment that overlooks the canal and a bit of blue or green natural amenity, then it'll cost more. So we already see that reflected in the values. It's just, I guess, a codification of what people want and what people need, and expressing that clearly.
Yeah, thanks. And affordability is an issue in the senior living market as well, Samantha. Is it something that is just the sort of luxury the higher end can afford at the moment? Is there anybody tackling the lower and mid markets?
Definitely. I mean, the mid market is something that everyone's focusing on a lot more now, because, well, in the past we've gone ideally to southeast and more affluent areas. What we're trying to establish more is more mixed tenures, so we can have affordable rents on site, you can have shared ownership, you can have outright sale, and it gives people the choice and flexibility. Because at its core, housing with care recognises this generation's ability to live independently for longer, but also offering the benefits of being part of an organised living community. So it's not just a price thing. A lot of it's also to do with sort of emotional well-being and social interaction.
Yeah, and a lot of developers in the past have said it's not financially viable at that sort of lower end. Is that changing?
To be honest, we've just got to be a bit more creative on how we can actually deliver these products. And if there are certain benefits, for example, speeding up the development process, then we've got to be looking at it, because we're so far behind at the moment. We've got about 12 million people aged 65 plus at the moment. That's going to increase to about 17 million fairly soon. So there's a long way to go in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Judith, you're nodding at various points about the value of green space and on affordability. Do you want to come back in on any of those points?
Yeah, I mean, particularly, what Martin was saying, and post-COVID, there is evidence to suggest that I think a piece of research done by the GLA about the price that people will pay for views onto green space. And a couple of years ago, as part of the Velocity team, which won the National Infrastructure Commission's placemaking competition, which we focused on more rural communities, and recognising that investment was going to have a huge impact on those rural communities in the corridor. And if we didn't address development there in a sustainable way, then it was going to get development was going to happen in an unsustainable way. And I think at the time people were sort of a bit puzzled as to why we focused on village and growing villages and village communities But what we've seen post-COVID is an acceleration of the trends that proposal was based on. So things like the acceleration towards home working, and of course everyone now appreciates the green space, but not everybody can afford it. So that model is very much based on how you use technology to do really high quality homes in rural development, but supported by sort of cycling and micro mobility infrastructure connecting into other larger conurbations, but in a way that you only needed to do now 1 or 2 or 3 days a week. So having sort of had that conversation a couple of years ago where people looked at us and really puzzled, we are now getting inundated with requests to come and help because they see the value of that model.
Yeah, it's a good time. Having been probably outcast as heretics for years now, it's everybody wants that conversation, don't they? It's it's good. It's accelerated the right values for a lot of people. Dan, what can you tell us on the sort of cost side? One of the pushbacks I hear from people is it's more expensive. They like the idea of modular. They understand the precision you can get in a factory and all weathers. But they say it's prohibitive. Is that true, or is it coming down?
No, it's coming back. I think I won't go into costs on this in this format, but we're on par with traditional building, from a 2-bed, 3-bed to a 4-bed, depending on specifications, etc. I think where offsite comes into its own is the speed of build and the less disruption it has. Our first batch for RBG starts in 2 weeks. We have 16 homes to build, and our program's 4 weeks, start to finich.
That's Greenwich RBG.
Correct, yes, yeah, Royal Borough of Greenwich, apologies. So that's where offsite comes into its own. It's the speed and the disruption, the less disruption.
Yeah, and what was it that sort of sold it for Greenwich for picking up such a large contract? How did you win that?
It was obviously our commercial team. We have a good sales team as well, very good sales team. I think they come to the factory a few times. It was our processes, the quality of our build as well. That was a massive forefront for this. We've built a pilot home as well in Greenwich, so you can book viewings to that. So anyone can go to Greenwich and go around the home. It's active, it's live. We've got electricity on. You can see what we can do. But it's like what Martin said, it's having that sustainability and the standardisation. So every product is exactly the same, be it a 2-bed, a 3-bed, or a 4-bed.
Yeah, thanks. And for those watching, please do join in with your questions in the Q&A section. I'm obviously doing such a wonderful job with my questions that you don't have anything further to add, but I can't believe that. We just had one pop up as if by magic. Jason Holroyd. What would the approach to smart building connectivity be in modular homes in terms of wired data cabling rather than wireless? Is that sort of spec that you're familiar with, Dan?
We have both. One of our projects, we have a wireless system. It's called a Wonderwall system. So there's no light switches, it's interactive. Whereas the RBG of Royal Borough of Greenwich framework is wire. So it's you're adaptable. Again, it's specification. Depending on which spec you want. This high-rise apartment block we're building, that's all wireless. Obviously, RBGs is social housing. So that's obviously data cables and traditional build. Yeah.
Are you seeing a lot more interest now than, say, 12 months ago?
A lot more, yes. A lot more.
Yeah. And do you think that will accelerate? It'll be further in another 12 months?
I think it will. There's a lot of people out there, or companies that can say they can do this. And there's only a few that can do it very well. I think the proof's in the pudding, mind the pun. I think you put your product out there, and obviously the public is your biggest critic. So if you can obviously build sustainable homes, it pleases everybody out there. You're on the right foot.
Yeah, absolutely. Another question here, D. Clark. What is the design life of a modular building, and are investors comparing this to existing construction methods based on Victorian housing that is, quotes, guaranteed through the test of time?
Again, I like that one. Obviously, like I said, we're BOPAS accredited, so you can get mortgages on these houses now. So it'll just be the same as going to an estate agent and buying a home, as opposed to an off-site construction home as well. But you need that BOPAS accreditation to make sure you've got your documentation, etc.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And you're working with Shed KM, aren't you, on the design side?
Correct. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. very cool architects. And Martin, are there other ways that developers are changing? I mean, does tech have a role to play? We've obviously had a lot of working from home. Is that going to be designed in to your units in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, part of what we've observed and what we've all experienced is looking across into what's happening in commercial real estate is the reverse image of what's happening in residential. So they're upset because there aren't any workers in their buildings. But what that means is that their workers are spending more time in residential assets. And so it falls to us to be able to fulfill a need which we didn't need to before, which was for homes to operate as workplaces. Retrofitting is possible. A lot of people are adapting themselves through the use of furniture and accessories and things like that. But I definitely think that at least the way things are now, and there's been a lot of research which suggests that people like working from home, not all the time, but they like the choice and they like the flexibility and they like the work blend. And they also like the idea of working in third locations as well. So something that's not home and something that's not the workplace, perhaps it's a co-working space that's nearby. I think what that means for us is that it gives us the opportunity to be able to, as I said before, give people what they want and what they need. And if we can continue to service their needs, then we can hopefully draw some of the tenants from commercial over to residential on a more permanent basis, at least more frequently, I think, if we're to be competitive in any way.
And what about co-living? Do you think that's a market that's got legs? We're seeing more applications coming through, but councils are not always accepting. They're not always sure about it. Do you think that's a serious gap in the market?
I think it is. And I think it's a gap which is created by the substandard of, not always the case, because there are some excellent HMO providers, but it's been driven a lot by the fact that if you're a young professional, particularly if you're single, the cost to rent a one bed by yourself is sometimes prohibitive. There's also the fact that you're not getting what you get in a shared house. So in a shared house, you get a room, but as a lot of young professionals who have been disproportionately negatively affected by the working from home trend have experienced, living and working in one room doesn't feel great.
Yeah.
But at least you have the camaraderie of the other people you live with to offset that. If you were to flip that and you were to have your own one bed, it would be great because you'd have this palace to yourself, but you'd have no one to share it with, and that would be increasingly lonely. And loneliness is a massive issue that we have in society, and it's a massive health risk as well. So what co-living offers is the balance of purpose-built space to work and to live, as well as the opportunity to join a community, stave off loneliness, and I mean, I haven't heard it said, but maybe find a partner as well.
Yeah,
that would be pretty appealing to me if I was a young professional. I'd move to a new city, because outside of university, you don't actually get much of a chance to be around people in your sort of cohort or your age. So having another opportunity to do that and the opportunity to partner up would probably be pretty attractive to me at that stage of my life.
Yeah, I think that's one of the sort of motivations that co-living companies are saying is about being with like-minded people. That it's more curated. It's less of a random. It's going into a house share and you don't know who's going to be in the next room. So I can see the logic to that. I mean, we've seen things like the hotel office now being launched. I had a couple of people come out and say you can go and work in a hotel room for the day, and whether you have the minibar going as a distraction, whether that's a good idea, I don't know. Are we likely to see? I mean, Judith, you are working at the cutting edge with some of the more forward-thinking clients. Are you seeing anything around tenure and sort of types of design to suit different models changing?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what Samantha said at the beginning as well, is that you need the right mix. And so what we're doing with both the Home of 2030 and the VeloCity, we're providing a sort of mix of different types of tenure and a mix of opportunities for coming together. And actually within the VeloCity proposal, this was before COVID, you know, we had the idea of a third space built into that proposal as a way of, you know, recognizing that we don't want to spend our lives commuting, but we don't necessarily want to work from home. And so doing pop-up, you know, or local communal working hubs. I think also we need to be careful about what we mean by home working. I think, you know, there's perception that it's all about people behind desks, but there's a whole range of different types of home working, you know, be it sort of childcare, nurseries, you know, more craft based home working. And so providing different spaces to satisfy different types of home working, I think is also really important. And basically, just to Martin's point about bringing people together, is designing in different opportunities, because not everybody is the same. So be that sort of communal allotments, cafes, things like building on the sharing economy. So having things like the Fix-It Cafe or the Library of Things, as well as a way of bringing people together, but also helping them to live more sustainably, and the role of technology as well in supporting that. And so looking at community applications and community groups, I think that's another thing that's really come out of COVID, actually, is how, you know, just even tools like WhatsApp are, you know, providing community groups with a way of, you know, borrowing the cup of sugar or the lawnmower, whatever it is, you know, that community spirit has really come through that tech. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, and what's the response from local authorities? Are they receptive, or is it very patchy?
Just to the sort of mix of,
well, to the sort of the future designing for 2030 with the modular elements, the self-build.
I think it is it's mixed. So I think some local authorities are more confident. I think there is still this pressure of housing supply and housing numbers that local authorities are under, and so I feel that sometimes they're under pressure to sort of square a circle. You know, how do you build in the social and active travel mobility infrastructure at the same time as meeting the housing demand? So I think that's a particular thing that the spatial planning piece, and maybe that comes out of the new planning reforms, needs to be addressed. And then the other thing is, as well, I see the sort of nervousness, again related to the delivery of designing in a process that's too specific to a particular procurement route. So they want that flexibility in the procurement when, you know, up to sort of REBA stage 3, which then does sort of point you down to, it's really hard because we want to go down a specific timber solution or a more modular solution, that they want that flexibility because they're having to make the numbers stack up financially, and they don't yet trust the market options to come forward in a way that's going to meet their sort of viability.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Martin, you want to come back in?
So I think Judith's points were all excellent, and I think part of the attraction of modular, at least for me and for us, is we get sight of contract value sooner. Having that, being able to understand at the very early on precisely how much everything's going to cost, give or take, is incredibly useful. It's incredibly important. And if you've established a relationship with a company like Dan's, and you've done that dance before, and you know what's involved, you know what can go wrong, then your ability to manage risk is vastly increased, and that's really, really attractive to capital, because if there's anything that they're nervous about is unforeseen issues. The reliability that modular offers and what Judith said is correct. And if you can find a local authority which is comfortable and on board with the vision you're trying to create and all of the technologies involved, then I mean, you don't have a smooth path to delivery, but you have something smoother, which can be perfected over time. And I think that's one of the things that really appeals to us, because my favorite model is the iPhone. If you look at the iPhone doesn't actually have better specs than a Samsung or a Huawei. What it does do is that they've spent a really long time perfecting and integrating and designing around what users actually want and what they need. And that allows them to deliver a product which meets their customers' needs perfectly. Not more, because you don't need a 4K camera. Most people don't need a 4K camera, and Apple don't offer a 4K camera, but they do offer functions and functionality which is in line with what their users need. So being able to listen, integrate, and perfect and hone over time that product is incredibly attractive and helps you manage risk in a way that we probably couldn't before.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. And Samantha, are you seeing the spec change for senior living product as the money moves into retirement from baby boomers, etc.? Has technology got more of a role to play in what you're seeing?
Definitely. I mean, for senior living generally, it's more 2-bedroom apartments rather than studios, which are a little bit too small, and 1 beds. But also, it's different types of spec, as you say, that's required. So, corridors need to be a bit bigger, lifts need to be larger, obviously, to take the buggies, and some of the operators have gone so far that they've managed to design moving kitchens, so where the work surfaces can go up or go down. I have actually seen one where they can move the cupboards. So if you need to get something out of a top cupboard, you can press a button and it will lower itself for you. But other forms of tech that we're starting to see come in is obviously the community, so they liaise between the apartments themselves. They can call down to the sort of main reception area if they need help or something. But also being able to interact with families too. So families can see how their loved ones are doing, if they need more care, if they've had a fall recently. All those sort of additional things that I think the tech part's going to be quite exciting going forward.
Yeah. And on the models, do you see a role for the public sector in making these financially viable, or different ways that the model can be wrapped and broaden it out into all areas of society and meet that housing crisis for senior living?
Absolutely. I think what we're starting to see now is more of the housing associations and RP starting to come more into more looking at it in sort of almost with like fresh eyes, because a lot of their existing stock, they've had sheltered housing anyway. What we're starting to see now is actually how these buildings can be run more efficiently as well. And as I mentioned at the beginning, because of the wide range of tenures that you can provide, you can provide choice to everyone. And having discussions with quite a few of the public sectors, they're very keen to come in, because also they're giving back to the community as well.
Yeah. Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you. And Dan, a question here from Bill Hull. COVID and imminent impact of Brexit are leading to material shortages and labour shortages in construction. How labour saving is modular, and do you anticipate any material supply issues?
When COVID obviously first struck and went into lockdown, it didn't affect us, obviously because we're in a controlled environment. We manage our supply chain very well. Because we build standardised items, we can then adapt. So obviously we've got a full functioning factory at the moment. Our office staff are rotating from home, so they're safe. and we've sort of changed our build process to adapt the 2 metre rule. So we can adapt each stage so not one person's working in proximity of the next colleague, etc. Supply chain, again, it's just having that standardised material, not having paint from Spain or your windows from Portugal. It's getting that standardised material that you can get it day in, day out. And it's managing the expectations as well. And forward planning.
Yeah. And do you anticipate any of your materials sort of dried up supply-wise?
No, we're okay. We've got a good procurement team.
Yeah. Yeah.
But again, that's the Moda offsite sort of the ethos where you can plan ahead. That makes sense. You know what you're building the next 2 months, 3 months, 6 months down the line, so you can plan. Because obviously there was a sort of rumours of the second phase coming through of COVID.
Oh, I think you've just frozen there a little bit. Dan, you might want to refresh screen. I'll put this next question to the panel. This is more of a sales question, I think. Are there smartphone technology or smart home technologies that help bring properties to the forefront? So that almost like the digital version of curb appeal, what is it that makes a particular property sexy and catches the eye for the buyer or the tenant? Does anybody want to have a stab at that one? There is a nod.
Oh.
Okay, Martin, you're brave.
So, apart from connectivity, I wouldn't have thought so.
Okay.
Really, I think it's, if you think about what the main purpose of a home is to enable you to live the best life that you can. So anything that supports that is a positive. But there are plenty of people who select large houses in the country that have very poor reception for their phones, and many people would not purchase those homes because they have poor reception on their phones. So that kind of gives you a framing. What we have, at least what I've observed, this is in the US, and maybe it has a lot to do with the some of the issues that they're having over there, but the share price of tech companies that provide home security systems has gone to the moon. So that either suggests that people want more secure homes or they feel less secure. I'm not sure if we will see the same trend reflected here in the UK. I mean, we're pretty conservative and we keep to ourselves anyway, so maybe not, but it's something that we could see. But yeah, broadly speaking, connectivity first. So broadband, the opportunity to play online games, Netflix, work is essential. Beyond that, I haven't seen anything to suggest otherwise.
Okay. Unless anybody wants to add to that, we'll take the next question. No? Okay. Question from Ed Cook at Morecom. There's a lot of discussion about repositioning retail space to deliver more housing in and around urban centres. What's the panel's view of this? Will it become a material segment of the market? So repurposing retail. Judith, do you want to share your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm not so familiar with sort of repurposing of retail, but definitely we've been having conversations about repurposing of office space. And we've seen already some pretty disastrous repurposing of office space for human habitation. So it does need to be done very carefully. And I think if I answer a sort of more macro picture, which is what we've seen post-COVID, is, you know, we had these bonkers plots of mass migration into monoculture urban centres, and then we all hate it. And actually, so the bigger question is, how do we replan and rezone our urban centres so it makes travel more comfortable and it makes the local economies and the central economies more sustainable? And I think that is a conversation that we're having with local authorities as well, and how maybe you can repurpose retail spaces more locally to support. You know, there's a lot of talk about loss of employment as a result of not having jobs in the city centre. I'd like to see actually the location of that employment in ways, and so we use space in different ways, and it's a bit sort of more mixed up.
Yeah. No, that's very interesting. Thank you. Yeah, a lot with zoning going on, and in this country we've got this possible planning revolution, and talk of sort of skipping the planning process and just having zoned areas for renewal, and one commercial use, so you don't have to apply for changes and things. Samantha, what do you think? Can you see people living in converted shopping centres close to amenity in city centres?
Actually, yes, I can, because especially on the senior side, they still want to be, as I said, fairly independent, be able to walk to the shop, still get the sort of loaf of bread, pint of milk, and really it's quality of life. But also they like to go to the coffee shops too, spend time. When they have the visitors and the family come, they don't just want to stay in the apartments. They like to go out and they go for walks and basically enjoy their retirement. So I can definitely see that happening. And some of the operators are already starting to snap up some retail facilities to redevelop as senior living now.
Right, gosh, so it is happening. And any that you can tell us about?
I can't really, sorry.
Okay. And Martin, would you be looking on your sort of shopping for sites? Will you be looking at your non-standard areas and big changes of use?
Potentially. I mean, there is a bit of a mismatch though between retail and commercial floor plates and residential needs, predominantly for daylight. So they're really good because you can get a really good ceiling height, but their depth can mean that if they're too deep, you end up with a lot of wasted space in the center. So they're not always ideal. I think the idea which will allow for, which we're interested in, because part of what we consider when we're looking at sites is the placemaking strategy overall. So an idea which is it seems to be developing at pace and seems to be delivering at pace is the idea of a 15-minute city. So I think the mayor of Paris recently re-elected on that as the central plank of her platform, which is the idea that within 15 minutes of walking and or cycling, you kind of have most of the things that you'd need to live a relatively comfortable life. So that includes a place to work, a place to exercise, health facilities in the form of doctor surgeries, chemists, schools may form part of that, shopping, etc., etc., etc. So we would be happy to look at anything in that condition, but would be more interested to see how it would be supported by what's happening around. And then furthermore, if we can help develop that capacity within that 15-minute radius, then we'll probably be interested in that as well.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. Dan, we've got time for one last question. It's a technical question on modular and cladding materials. Question from PJ Appleton. In light of new law changes around things like cladding materials, the EWS1 certification,
yep,
if you will, can modular adapt quicker and more flexibly to new law changes on materials usage than traditional build?
we have already. So, for instance, when we built this CLT tower block, the government legislation said anything over 30 metres needed a steel ectoskeleton. So we changed the design within 3 days and had it in manufacture in 6. All our cladding obviously is fire regulations up to date, updated, and we can sort of change design within 2 to 3 days.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thanks very much. Thanks everyone. Please do join at home or in the office with a round of applause, if you please. That was brilliant. Covered a lot of good ground and really inspiring, looking at some of the trends that are coming in the next year and years ahead. Thank you to all our panelists. I hope you can stay around. If not, enjoy the rest of your days. We now have a networking break. We'll go back into the networking room where you can work the tables, and we'll be back in here for the second half. We've got a presentation from Moda Living and another panel. We'll be back in here at 11:20. That's 20 past 11. See you on the other side. Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much for joining us again on the presentation stage. I'm delighted to welcome next someone who's passionate about developers becoming beacons of new technology, which is music to all our ears. Please, can I welcome Lucy Sharp from Moda Living. Lucy, if you pop your camera on.
Hi guys, hello, hi Paul.
Hi Lucy, I'll leave you to it. Over to you, thank you.
Oh, give me a second. Right, hi guys, thank you so much for tuning in. I guess I just wanted to tell everybody a little bit about Moda Living as one of the UK's leading build-to-rent developers and operators, give you a little overview of where we're at in terms of our current portfolio, give you a little look into one of our flagship developments in Manchester, and then talk a little bit about our approach to technology. So this screen is just an overview of our projects at the moment, 850 million GDV projects on site. We're in the process of building 8,000 new homes. We'll actually have 10,000 residents living in Moda buildings over the next 5 years across the UK. And of course, those buildings are made up of co-working spaces and mixed amenity, mixed use space, and of course, apartments. I guess kind of what sets us apart in the space is that our focus has always been on delivering next generation neighborhoods. So really kind of attuning ourselves and evolving our business and our model to what residents want, bearing in mind that, you know, their needs are ever changing. So just to look at our first development, so Moda was only founded in 2013, and we actually opened our first neighbourhood in Manchester, Angel Gardens, which is just off the northern quarter, for anyone who knows Manchester. Angel Gardens opened at the end of last year, and we completed our final phase, which is a 33-story tower just a couple of months ago. So in the midst of lockdown, which was interesting. And just to kind of give you a look through the spaces at Angel Gardens. So resident spaces, we've got lounges, including a big cinema room. We have co-working spaces, gym and fitness spaces. We've got a roof terrace with a football pitch overlooking the city of Manchester, a private dining room. All of these areas are obviously accessible for residents. It all comes as part of their rental payments. So library, lobby, and you can see here, this is our roof terrace. It's actually pretty cool for anybody who's into sport. You can play tennis, badminton, football on the roof. So we try and do lots of social events here, and obviously at the moment those have been socially distanced. I can tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. And then of course we work with commercial partners, so usually local businesses, local suppliers, you know, bringing on the kind of businesses that residents have fed back that they'd like to see within the building. So Pot Kettle Black, Cafe Culture, Hero, which is our tech and wellbeing partner. We kind of put a lot of focus on residents' health and wellbeing, so I'll go into that partnership a little bit later. And then obviously working with local brands for convenience, so Co-op, etc. And then just really quickly going to dash through some of the other developments that we have up and coming. So the Lexington in Liverpool will open in July 2021. We've got the Mercian in Birmingham. We're on site at the moment. We've just topped out actually the Mercian Tower. New York Square in Leeds. McEwen in Edinburgh. Again, we're on site for all of these. Holland Park in Glasgow. Great Charles Street, Birmingham. We're at planning committee in a couple of weeks for this particular site. And then Brighton and York. So on to technology, which obviously is the focus of today's meeting and discussion. I guess from our perspective, we've always felt, and perhaps obviously being a fairly new company, and obviously with build to rent still being very much in its infancy in the UK, technology obviously plays, a hugely important role in the day-to-day experience of residents. And I think we've always wanted to make sure that, I think somebody had said on the last panel about, these 15-minute neighbourhoods that are cropping up. And I suppose that's kind of what Moda stands for, in the sense that, we want everything within our neighbourhoods to be pretty much on site, without losing that immersion in local community and playing a role in building and regenerating local spaces. But obviously our approach to technology is something we take really seriously, and we see ourselves very much as spearheading a tech movement in the build to rent space and trying to set a precedence. So, with our pipeline being 2.5 billion, we've got a huge impact that we can make in terms of how technology actually moves forward in these communities. And so we started, I suppose, in a fairly simple way that isn't necessarily hugely innovative, but obviously in the residential space was, which was to create an app for our residents, the My Moda app, which is quite simple. Once a tenant is living or onboarded within one of our neighbourhoods, they have access to an app that has absolutely everything they could possibly need, including 24/7 concierge. They can also make their rent payments on the app. They can access all of their accounts. In prospective tenants, virtual tours, or existing tenants who want to see other areas within the building. So if they're thinking of upgrading to a penthouse or a new area that's just opened within a neighbourhood, we can do all of that virtually. The same applies with reservation facilities, etc. I think probably the way that it's been used the most is during lockdown for kind of keeping people connected and making sure that they're not isolated during such a difficult time. So we ran a heap of virtual events, most of them focused on health and well-being, working closely with Hero, our wellness tech provider. So we would be on average streaming, to 33,000 people at one point. And obviously this runs outside of our residence, but we were doing balcony workouts. We had wine tasting within your apartment. So we would drop off wine or craft beer for residents who signed up, and talk them through. The same with cooking classes, creating nutritious meals. And again, that feeling where in a time when you're obviously on your own and isolated within your apartment, some people, young professionals living alone, others with their families within our developments. The idea was to link them up to the outside world, but in the safest possible way. So that's how the My Moda app has been used. But more recently, we've started to integrate it with other forms of technology that I'll go into in just a second. So connectivity obviously is key. We see connectivity as probably one of the most important elements of the build to rent movement. And that's why we call our neighbourhoods next generation neighbourhoods, and tend to move a little bit away from the term build to rent because it's kind of faceless. It doesn't necessarily represent so many of the brands that kind of sit within this sector. But just a screenshot to show you some of our technology partners. Probably the flagship partner, the cornerstone would be Utopia, that I'll go into a little bit more detail about at the moment because they're an incredibly exciting Internet of Things software provider. But obviously Samsung, Uber, Sky, Canopy, an amazing fintech prop tech company that helps us with residents' financial health and well-being. Hero, that I mentioned from a wellness and nutrition perspective. And then, of course, connectivity and ensuring that you have local transport solutions, on your doorstep. And that includes, obviously, the tram in Manchester. We have all sorts of offers and special passes for residents. And again, the same applies with working with energy providers, that we can ensure that our buildings can be more sustainable and that we can keep costs down for residents. Yeah, so I guess in terms of Utopia as a partner, this is a way to completely vertically integrate our entire brand. So obviously, tech enablement is something that we're moving towards, but we want to be entirely tech driven as we move forward into 2021. So the technology that Utopia enables helps build to rent operators to lower maintenance costs, utility costs, but obviously that benefits residents as well. So it's improving, user experience like 100-fold in terms of, making sure that the wellness of our buildings gives them the best possible living experience. So Utopia, for example, the sensors that we have throughout our developments monitor temperature, humidity, wind speed, CO2, the full shebang. We create wellness scores for every single area of our buildings. That's the shared spaces, but also wellness scores for inside apartments, individuals' apartments. So we can see in real time on our dashboards, both remotely at head office, at headquarters, which is up in Harrogate, but also obviously the concierge, who are, the operational staff who are looking after the buildings can see in real time, if the door's open and it's causing the temperature to drop inside a building, or for example, if the wind speed on the roof terrace is too high for residents to be up there, if there's too many people in a certain area, especially in a social distancing age with COVID. We can do so many things in real time. So it's not actually looking back in hindsight and going, oh my goodness, we really need to keep a check on all of these lights that are on in spaces that haven't been used for a certain amount of hours. So again, obviously in the long term, this makes our buildings worth more, which obviously attracts investors. But it also makes them more sustainable. And obviously with a huge focus on ESG now in the residential building space, it's grossly important that we do everything we can to bring down carbon emissions, make sure that we're taking sustainability incredibly seriously. So this works not just development by development, but across the whole portfolio. So I thought it'd be useful just to kind of give you an overview of what we're doing during COVID. Again, you look at our developments, this is where residents are living, and during a lockdown, you have to be incredibly careful, not just for, the residents' health and safety, but also obviously for operational staff. So we're using Utopia's technology, so a number of sensors throughout the building, thermal screening in gyms and all of those communal spaces, people counting cameras as well across the whole building, that will allow us to track resident volume in real time. Same applies if you walk into the gym, instantly your temperature is taken in a millisecond and there's either a green or a red light. If it's a red light, you go back to your apartment. And until further measures are taken to assess whether or not you could be potentially carrying COVID. It sounds pretty, that's kind of very blunt way of describing it, but basically it allows us to really start to task, to use the data that we're capturing to task how we actually operate our buildings moving forward, and keep everybody safe. Same applies with co-working spaces, for example. If there's people in a co-working space, a resident might be in their room, they want to use a co-working space, they can automatically log into their Moda app and see which co-working spaces are free and clean. And on the other side of it, from an operational perspective, we'll have a real-time alert saying, this co-working area has just been evacuated. Then we can automate a cleaning regime, and then we can set the green light to show residents that it's just been cleaned and it's available to be booked again. So again, using technology to really protect people, but also to drive common sense in all honesty. A few more of our partnerships. So again, I've sort of said, we see ourselves as a tech company in many ways, but we've created, I guess, partnerships with some of the leading players in the prop tech and fintech space, to fast track this tech enablement. We're not trying to outwit our techie counterparts or attempt to do what they're already doing really well. Instead, we're onboarding, and integrating these amazing providers to ensure that our neighbourhoods are completely tech-enabled. So Canopy, as I mentioned before, helps residents improve their Experian credit score. So these are people who are renting, who in the future might want to get a mortgage, own their own house, or simply, obviously, keep tabs on their finances. And Canopy gives them a credit score just simply by paying their bills. But also it allows residents to reserve an apartment in just 10 clicks online. And it also allows us to pre-screen residents' financial health prior to bringing them on board. Samsung, everybody knows Samsung, but we're actually working really closely on with these guys to develop, I guess, truly smart neighborhoods. So this partnership really is a watch this space. We already have Samsung appliances across every single apartment in every single neighborhood, all of our communal spaces as well. And we're talking kind of smart fridges, that have cameras built in, and the technology is crazy, but without sounding like it's kind of gimmicky. The actual purpose is to really make sure that we're benefiting residents' lives and evolving to the kind of needs that they want. So that's something that you guys will hopefully be hearing more about next year. Health and well-being, again, there's technology that helps us to, ensure that health and being is at the forefront. This was always part of our brand from day one, really, really important to Moda. We want our residents to be healthy and happy. In doing so, obviously, we can grow our neighbourhoods, increase brand loyalty, and obviously feel that we're doing something good in the residential space rather than, being a big bad developer. Actually, we have a long-term vested interest in the health and well-being of not only the residents that live within our neighbourhoods, but also the wider community. So we're doing a ton of stuff to enhance that. So you can see here, all of our schemes include nutritionists, wellbeing coaches, sleep advisors, mindfulness classes. And again, all of these are available through the app as well as in Heroes physical gym spaces within our developments. So when somebody joins a Moda neighbourhood, they go through, or obviously it's optional, a wellbeing test when they're onboarded, and we look to retest them within 6 months and assess how we can help enhance, if we haven't already, their wellbeing and health. And then just to end, these are really a screenshot just of our corporate partners, but you can see some of the names that we're working with, not only obviously from a funding perspective, but also some big brands, some big retail brands that we work very closely with, as well as the smaller suppliers within our neighbourhoods. And that's it for me. Thank you very, very much for listening. I hope I didn't run over too much.
That was wonderful. Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you.
That was great. I know you haven't been there very long, but you wouldn't know from the presentation. Very, very comprehensive. Thank you very much. And I think you passed the test that they were setting you by doing that so early on in your time. Can I ask the other panelists to activate your cameras and mics, please? And we'll get the second discussion underway. We'll start with a quick once round. If you introduce yourselves when I come to you, just say who you are, where you're from, what you do. Henry.
Hi, everyone. I'm Henry. I'm director at WiredScore. WiredScore's a digital connectivity certification for real estate. So we've established commercial products, but we recently launched, about a year ago, a certification for the build-to-rent market. And we're working with leaders in the market like Greystar, Legal & General, and others to certify their build-to-rent assets.
Wonderful, thank you. Victoria.
Hello there. Yes, so I'm a principal associate at Mills & Reeve, which is a national law firm. We've got offices in Manchester, Leeds, Cambridge, Norwich, Birmingham, and I'm in the London office. And then we've got cross-discipline teams right across the bed sector, so encompassing hotels, disputes, build-to-rent. We've got very close ties with a lot of the universities, so we've got a big student living department. And then I'm on the more private client individual side, so buying and selling, developing properties between sort of 1 and 30, 40 million for private individuals.
Nice. James.
Hello, my name is James. I'm the founder and CEO of Keep It Please. We are a financial health check and affordability assessment company for the residential letting space. We are currently in talks to, integrating with some of the big names that you can think of within the game, because our platform is one that can be integrated in a very seamless way. And here to help out and answer any questions that are going our way.
Wonderful. That's what we like to hear. Thank you very much. Lucy, there was already a question. If we just go back to your presentation about the temperature screening, is that carried out through CCTV cameras? There we go.
About that. Right, so temperature screening is not done through CCTV. It's not done through cameras. So it's not, how do I put this? It's not a kind of breach of privacy. You stand in front of a sensor within certain co-working areas, and it's an instant red or green light for temperature. There's no facial recognition, there's no cameras. It's just a pure temperature monitor.
Yeah, okay, that's great. And thank you for that insight and revealing so much about what you do. I think it's really important that we have companies that we can look up to that are in the development community that are actually adopting tech. It's what we all want to see. Something that I'm sure we all get asked a lot from both tech and property people is, how do developers choose their tech partners. Can you tell us a little bit from your understanding of Moda, how they go about choosing their tech partners?
Yeah, of course. So I think the interesting thing, and bearing in mind I'm a comms professional here, so I've come on board and looked at how we can communicate the things that we're doing within the space, and I guess talk a little bit more about what Build to Rent can do better, and so on and so forth. And what really interested me is how strategically Moda has thought about their partnerships. They're not just a random collection of exciting brands that they can talk about in the press. Each of these partners has been selected mainly because of the data, that we're able to use to look at the long-term health of our neighbourhoods. So very much, the long-term vision to benefit the communities that we're moving into. So the partners that have either come to us or we have gone to them have come to us mainly with presentations or proposals that can clearly lay out a path with milestones, all focused around data, to kind of prove the capabilities. And obviously, the majority of these partners fit very well together, so they integrate very well together. And I think, as I mentioned, Utopia have been, I guess, behind the scenes. We've only really recently announced that we're working with them. They've been behind the scenes. They work with us really from blueprint stage. So with Manchester, we only brought them on when we'd already topped out that building. It hadn't opened, but at that point, obviously, you have all of your wireless cables in. There's a whole bunch of stuff that you can't physically change when a building has already been built. There are things that you can enhance, but now with Utopia, they're actually helping us design our future buildings, which is where it gets really exciting. And those buildings are now being designed with sustainability in mind, and so how we can drive operational costs and utility costs down. So partnerships like Utopia allow us to cut around 45% off those costs, and for each development across their lifespan save in the region of £3-4 million per development, which is incredible. And the idea is Utopia will review all of those partners that we're working with, from energy to pervasive Wi-Fi, etc., and show data that suggests whether we should be working with other partners or continuing with the partners that we're working with, because the long-term benefit and for the operational sustainability. Does that make sense? I think I've just completely rambled, but hopefully get good.
Perfect. It's compelling. It's about the business case, really. Henry, we're hearing a lot about accelerating into the future over the last 6 months with the effect of COVID and working from home, etc. How have you seen the industry adapt through that period?
Well, so I think when we first went into lockdown, there was a moment of brief panic of will my building be okay, and will my residents be okay? And the kind of, I guess the good news is, for the large majority of our clients that are operating buildings, they have kind of survived and actually thrived a little bit over the course of the last 3 to 6 months. I think looking forward, I think it was the chief executive of Microsoft actually that said we've seen about 2 years of digital transformation in the last 2 months. And I think what developers are starting to think about is not just preparing themselves for today's trends, but also thinking further down the line, what's the next trend that's going to come much, much quicker than I thought it might, and how can I prepare my building for that? And I think it's interesting, Lucy's presentation, a lot of the tech that we're starting to see put into buildings is about impacting user experience. Internet of Things and smart technology really being at the forefront of that technology change. And I think the one thing that we do know for sure is that all of these technologies are going to be powered by digital connectivity, by the internet. And so what we've seen from a developer perspective is a doubling down on the future-proofing of the digital infrastructure in their building, and making sure that whatever they put in now can survive whatever trend that they need to cope with over the next 5 or 10 years, because that's the lifespan of these buildings. And who knows where we'll be from a technology perspective in 10 years, other than knowing that it will require more digital connectivity.
Yeah, well, quite right. It's just going one way, isn't it? James, you were nodding along about the integration of tech products and things. Can you tell us a little bit more about your products and what else you think will come through into the rental space in residential? There we go.
Yeah, sure. So, as Henry mentioned, the future is in integration and in the user experience space. One thing that we have, built Cubicles with, one thing we built Cubicles having a strong focus on is how we can integrate with other platforms. For example, if a tenant, walked into an agency or sees a property online, how quickly can they go from "I like this" to "I'm moving in"? And how are we able to reduce that space, down to that time span down to 5 minutes or under? And then once they move in, signing those documents, as we enter a space of a time of digital adoption where people don't no longer walk into offices to provide their documents, how do we ensure that fraud is mitigated? How do we ensure that information is flowing across securely? And how do you ensure that companies are receiving valuable data which help them protect, their properties and protect the rental income that they forecasted to receive? And essentially, we have built a platform that allows us to do all of what I've just mentioned, within 5 minutes, and providing a very good user experience in the process of doing so.
Yeah, and some of those are sort of fintech products, as fintech we know infamously is sort of further ahead of prop tech. Do you think that we'll see more fintech products coming through, and what are some of the trends that people in the audience might look out for in the next 12, 24 months?
Yeah, so fintech is definitely a space that prop tech needs to embrace more of. You've got InsurTech playing a huge part of that. Essentially, what we're looking at now is an industry where a person is able to, accurately verify, their financial health check, then have an insurance company step in to, either protect the landlord or the institution against the rental default of that, and essentially being able to access the properties, using IoT devices or smart access. So that is what the future in our view looks like over the next 12 months, 12 to 24 months at least, anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's very interesting. Thank you. And Victoria, when you're advising people as a professional advisor, and they're buying, £2 million plus houses all the way up 20, 30 million, does the rise, the ascent of technology in those properties create some interesting sort of contractual issues that throws up?
Yeah, so certainly. So it impacts both on the sort of due diligence side, in that clients who are spending, the 5, 10, 15, 20 million pounds on a house fully expect to walk in on day one and everything work, and that includes the sauna, the pool, the 10 plasma screens that are all run off one iPad and then things like that, the control screen. So we're finding that a normal survey just doesn't cut it anymore. It has to be a surveyor who either has expertise in or works with a specialist company who comes in and does a full M&E survey as part of it, and literally checking all of those, every single light, every single control that does everything on a digital basis, because the expectation for the client when they're spending that amount of money is that they will be able to walk in on day one and use all of those things correctly. But there also needs to be an element of handover between the previous owner and the new owner. For mere mortals like you and me, we're just buying a house with a boiler and just doesn't get serviced, and that doesn't really matter. But actually, when you're getting a very technical system, we need to be able to get that continuity of service of the people who did do the programming, who might be able to solve any issues. And so to be able to create those relationships between the outgoing owner and the new purchaser is important for our client experience.
Yeah, and are you seeing the profile of where people are looking and the sorts of people? We've seen all the weekend papers full of one feature after another about people fleeing London and buying rural pads and things like that. Is that really happening on the ground?
mean, it certainly is opening up. There's a lot more properties that a lot more people are fighting over, and where people's needs are changing and have been forced to change because of the situation. People looking at, actually, I do want to have a space where a dedicated office, perhaps for both professionals working at home, where they might only have had one before, but also the connectivity for that. Does the infrastructure support an actual, two people working from home, plus potentially two children on, 2 or 3 children doing homeschooling on Microsoft Teams and things like that. So actually wanting to make sure that all of that is there as well, but also the access to green space, and the people when the priority might have been, actually, I need to be near a transport link that's going to be able to get me to, central town 5 days a week. People are really reassessing and actually, looking that a little bit further out, but having other options available to them is becoming, a lot more attractive.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see how that unfolds. Henry, were you wanting to come back in there?
Yeah, it's just interesting because it's people wanting to work from home is not a new trend, right? It's just an accelerated trend from what we saw perhaps like a couple of years ago. But I think what's interesting about what some of the build to rent companies are doing, which is like providing working space, has been something which the big companies have been doing for ages, like building big offices and wanting people to live there by providing them like kitchen space. And I think the challenge for resi developers, and some of them are like changing literally the layouts of rooms so that people can work more from there, is what does the sort of taking the principles of what does the office of the future look like, and integrating it a little bit into people's homes. And from a technology perspective, that doesn't just mean great connectivity, great internet connectivity, but also things like mobile, which is a trend we're just starting to see come through office. Is that going to be something which we see accelerated in residential? How important is it going to be for people to be able to use their mobile phones in their apartments? I would say more so now than it was 6 months ago. So that blending of space and things being more mixed use is something that I think will have profound impacts for the tech that we use in our homes.
Yeah, and WiredScore has launched during the summer, launched a smart council. Can you tell us a little bit more about the aims and objectives of that initiative?
Yeah, sure. So I think we started our business in connectivity, which I think is still the foundation of any great technology focused building is can actually you get connected to the internet quickly, and can you use your devices in there? But thinking about like what the next big trend is, we think it's to do with smart. And actually there's in the office market in particular, there's no real clear definition of what a smart building is. And that's true in the office market, even more true in the residential market, like what actually makes up a smart home. And so we've created a smart council to help us define what a smart building looks like. And the way it's going to do it is by defining user outcomes and focusing on user outcomes first, and then building back to what technology empowers or enables that great user experience. And so broadly, we see a smart building as being 4 things at the moment. One is providing an inspirational user experience. The second thing is it being cost effective. The third thing is a building that performs well on sustainability. And the fourth thing is a building that's future-proofed. And so the Smart Council's work is kind of developing those definitions further, and ultimately helping us measure how smart a building is based on the user outcomes that building provides. We've got 40 of the world's leading landlords and developers on the council, people like British Land, Derwent, Hines, and others. And at the moment, the Smart Council is very focused on office. But where offices go, residential typically follows. And we expect to be able to start defining what a smart building and a smart apartment looks like in a residential space quite soon.
Yeah. No, it's fascinating. Thank you. And Lucy, does that sound like something that, from a developer's perspective, would be of use to you to have that sort of discussion formalized around what makes a smart building?
Oh gosh, yeah, 100%. I mean, these are conversations, I suppose, that we're having already behind the scenes, pulling in the likes of Utopia, who obviously, like I said, look at our building blueprints and help us repurpose spaces. So, for example, if we know that if Utopia's data shows us, for example, that the cinema room and the private dining rooms aren't being used by residents as much as they should. And we can also run, resident surveys through the app to find out, whether they need more co-working space, for example. Then we can literally repurpose entire parts of the building. And the same would apply for things like underground car park. Over time, we're hoping that with car sharing and with, smart scooters and with obviously all of the great links to transport systems, that we can reduce, the number of people who need to own cars within the building, and therefore perhaps use half of what would be a ginormous car park space for co-working or for extra wellness space or for gym, etc., etc. And I think everything that Henry said is absolutely spot on. And from a kind of appliance and true smart tech perspective, we're working with Samsung to create entire smart buildings, smart neighborhoods. But in terms of, like Henry said, this is something that's being focused a lot in the commercial space and in office buildings. What I'd like to say is that the tech capability that we've now got in terms of our co-working space is the kind of technology that WeWork didn't have and doesn't have. So it's really exciting. And I think that residential, with co-working spaces can really lead the way in the commercial workspace as well. With the ability to automate cleaning regimes on desks that have just been evacuated, and for residents to book through an app from their apartment, walk down and sit at a desk knowing it's just been cleaned. I think that's game changing. And I think that's something that every single residential building that is now housing, that I think it's JLL data said 89% of Brits will now be working from home at least one day a week for indefinitely. And that's, COVID aside, there's been a change. And after this pandemic passes, there's going to be a new way of life, a new way of working.
Yeah, it's fascinating because we've seen technology start in the consumer world, and that's sort of been the orthodox way of things, and then it comes into the business-to-business world, and it's now that with working from home, there's sort of the tide is turning, and things that are in commercial buildings that we're talking about being installed in our homes. So it's interesting seeing it play out. James, are you seeing sort of new models come through as well on the sort of tenure and the business model for residential? We're seeing articles about the hotelization. It's one of those awful words of almost residential as a service and easy in, easy out. Do you think that we'll go that far?
I definitely do see us head in that direction, especially with the work from home trend picking up and different, if you've been following certain countries allowing people to come in there and come and stay on a longer work visa, for example, or an annual living in visa, as that trend picks up, we are going to see a lot more people coming in from other countries just to come and reside, within the UK for a period of time, even though they're employed by a tech company in California, for example, and will be getting paid along with the wages or the waiting across that country in line with what they should be earning. So as that picks up, the easy in, easy out access, user experience becomes very important, because if you think about a person coming in from Germany with an employer all the way in the States getting paid in dollars, coming into the UK, you get a very complicated employment scenario, which arguably is better managed by technology rather than having an individual trying to assess that, because you're going to have a lot of mistakes being made due to human error, of course. So it is definitely a trend that will be picking up in the future. As I would like to say, we head into a borderless employment world, and technology does play a part in that.
I can see that. Victoria, can you see things changing at the higher end along similar lines, or do you think it's going to be very conventional for the time being?
I think there's going to be a shift, obviously, where it might have been sort of, say, overseas management maybe coming in and working here and then going back abroad. Then those professionals want to be able to walk in day one, have their family set up, have their but need to be able to visualize the apartments and visualize the houses that they're buying, because actually it's going to be very important to them what their home situation is going to be for that time period. And so having things like digital videos, walkthroughs, so that people can see the houses when they're on the market and things like that, and actually where the market embraced that slightly over COVID, I think that will then have an even more trigger through that will start to become the norm, that actually you'll be able to do, when you're looking on Rightmove, you'll be able to have a full sort of VR experience of going in, and that's what the people at the higher end of the market will expect and will want, because that's a better use of their time. Or actually they can employ a property finder who can go out and do the initial look round for them, but then if they narrow it down to 3, but then actually they're then able to see those spaces in as much of a realistic environment, so they can make the decision, it'll all be lined up for them, and then they're ready when they come in for their employment here in the UK.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Please do join in on the Q&A section, those that are watching, and I'll start coming to those. Henry, there's a question already put there around the plan for the smart buildings certification, or however you want to define that. Will it adapt as the use of people's data and analytics becomes much more regulated in law?
I mean, for sure it will. I think from a government perspective, the government's sort of chasing the tech companies on many of these issues. Regulation is such a difficult thing to design on the fly, and yet the way that we use data and analytics is changing so quickly. So what I expect to see over the next few years is a massive increase in the way that companies are using data and analytics to try to impact those user outcomes, and the government being a kind of fast follower and catching up with regulation. I think if you look at a lot of the major tech companies, they're actually asking for more regulation so that they can help govern the way that they control the data and how it's processed. So I think for sure it will, and actually it's probably one of the biggest unknowns is just how government gets into that space and starts to regulate it in a way that both maintains tech companies' ability to be able to provide great user experiences, but also respects their privacy. It's a hugely complicated space at the moment.
Yeah, no, for sure. Lucy, can I put that question to you as well, around the sort of the privacy backlash that we're seeing, people getting far more clued up on what their rights are, what they're accepting when they tick a box, all those sorts of things. How does that work through your thinking?
Yeah, 100%. I think everybody is completely mindful of the fact that people's privacy is absolutely vital, crucial importance. And I think this technology, I think the way that we view it is, and something that we have to be very firm about communicating, is that these sensors, this is not meant to feel like Big Brother is watching you, that I've gone off to the library within my communal building and I am being followed around and watched. In terms of this data collection, it is not specific to an individual. It's aggregating data in a building that has 1,000 residents and sectioning off that data to work out the best way to change how that building runs in the future. So we look at it very broadly, not to understand necessarily the habits of our residents, because that goes on the edge of this Big Brother is watching you, but how can we treat the way that these people are living and save them money in utility bills, make this building more sustainable, create new developments that actually enhance what this constantly evolving resident is looking for. And that covers off everything from people who are looking to relocate from London back up north to home, where all of the major corporate companies are opening headquarters, or giving their staff the ability to work from wherever they want moving forward. So I think it's something that we're very mindful of, and it's certainly something that will form a big part of my own communication, because it's obviously the first thing that a journalist is going to ask you when you're talking about this level of smart technology. So I would say from our end, it's something that we're constantly looking at and evolving, and that data is purely to aggregate and understand how we need to make our buildings run more efficiently.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you very much for sharing. A question here, which I'll put across the panel. Do smart buildings mean more money is expected to be paid for that than a normal property? So does it get passed on to the buyer, the tenant, the occupier, paying a premium for smart buildings? Anybody want to have a first stab at that?
I can go first if that's helpful. I think my initial answer would be no, it shouldn't. I think that build to rent as a sector is constantly looking at the issue or the question around affordability. That's something that's on the forefront of all of our minds. I think that different build to rent developers obviously have different propositions. Some are focused on premium, some are co-living, some are lower end, and most of us have an affordability percentage that we have to hit for certain cities, etc. But in terms of the rental premiums, this smart technology should not be changing them, because the whole purpose of it is to drive costs down. So in the long term, not only are we making our assets as a developer and operator worth more, but we should be making the user experience so much better that we can drive down their own costs substantially. So I think but if you remove smart tech from the question, first of all, you look at, is build to rent affordable for the masses? And taking Moda as an example, perhaps you have to look at perhaps talking about it as value for money rather than affordability. So what are you getting from a build to rent development, highly amenitized, no deposit, no fees at all, no hidden costs? Your rent includes gym membership, it includes endless co-working, it includes Uber credits, it includes energy, Wi-Fi, various other provisions. And if we can only bring that down by making our buildings more sustainable in the long term, it shouldn't be a case of how can we get more money out of these residents because we've got cool technology. So that would be the way that I would view it.
And I think it's a really interesting question. Like, first of all, super difficult to quantify. Like, what actually, what is a smart building? Like, how do you relate that back to rental values? And I guess this is not just about like rental prices. This is also about persuading people to stay longer. So in tech world, we call this the stickiness of a product. Like, how sticky is it that you're on Facebook all the time and you've got your friends there? And I think that's what a lot of smart products are able to do. They're able to drive longevity and tenure, not just drive up prices. And I would be cautious about trying to direct sort of specific smart technology at rental premiums. Although at Wide School we will try to do it with our certification, but just because they are hugely complex subjects, and without a proper methodology, it's very easy to get the wrong end of the stick with the data.
Yeah, James, I know the work that you do, that you're very passionate about sort of social justice and access for all, and you have sort of policies around not barring people that are on DSS and on social security and things like that. Do you have any views on this around smart buildings and technology?
My initial reaction is it will not drive up prices. Like Henry said, there shouldn't be a direct correlation between smart technology and rental premiums or increases in rent. The key benefit of smart technology is actually driving down the operational cost involved in all these properties. And if a build to rent developer is able to accurately fix a problem rather than getting a contractor to come in multiple times, that should in turn obviously lead to a reduction in the operational cost of that unit. And on the side of the social aspect of things, it should also mean that these properties are now more accessible to a wider range of people, provided they're able to demonstrate that they can afford these properties. And once they're in there, you've again got the stickiness of the individual to the property that they stay in because of all the technology built in there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And Victoria, just changing tack slightly. I know you work on the sort of extra care market as well. And are you seeing that change in terms of combining your two worlds of the sort of higher end properties with extra care, that's moving into the sort of the combined product with the private healthcare being in there as well for the higher end?
Yeah, so very much, as was said on the first panel, that the problem very much at the moment is the supply rather than the demand. It's definitely with the generations. There's a real need for more and more properties, and they're all different cost prices. So, but there are people who will be used to a certain type of lifestyle, will want to be able to maintain that, but also want the particularly things where lockdown has identified the problems with perhaps you don't want to be going into hospitals for particular appointments and things like that, where you might have relied on that before. And do you want to have something a more controlled health space available to you that is following or is fully stocked with the PPE that you want and all of those kind of things, but also people realizing the mental effects of isolation, and then actually living in a community but having their own space has the perfect blend for them. But to be able also having the cinema, the library, the concierge that can arrange the tickets to the opera and things like that when it is back on, but being able to have the lifestyle that they want, but also in the collegiate atmosphere with other like-minded people, I think is definitely going to just become more and more attractive.
Yeah, superb. Another question here from Tim Huxtable. Henry, do you think pervasive Wi-Fi 6, you might want to tell us a little bit about that, will help enable more retrofit smart tech IoT like leak detection and other devices in buildings?
Thank you, Tim, for that curveball. I'll focus on the word pervasive as opposed to the differences between Wi-Fi 5 and 6. But I think will pervasive Wi-Fi enable Internet of Things and other smart devices in buildings? Pervasive Wi-Fi meaning kind of Wi-Fi all over the building. I think if you looked like 2 or 3 years ago when we started thinking about this residential product, people basically only expected to have Wi-Fi in their apartments. And so we didn't really design our scorecard around ensuring that there was Wi-Fi's in corridors and Wi-Fi in lift. Fast forward to today, a lot of developers with buildings over 10 stories, because all the mobile phone masts in the UK are about 10 stories high and they point downwards. So buildings that are kind of quite tall at the top of the building, you're unlikely to get any mobile signal. Buildings with quite tall buildings are relying on Wi-Fi to allow residents to make phone calls. And of course, if you're moving through a building and you're in a corridor or in a lift or in reception, you want a kind of seamless phone call moving through that building. And so lots of developers now are kind of putting in pervasive Wi-Fi, flooded Wi-Fi through corridors and lifts and other places. So that's the kind of history of it. I guess for now, like pervasive Wi-Fi is pretty essential if you're thinking about provisioning sensors or understanding the way that people are moving through the building. Then pervasive Wi-Fi is kind of a must, and it's quite difficult to retrofit a pervasive Wi-Fi if you haven't thought about doing it in the past. And so I think a really important message for developers now is like, how do you prepare your physical infrastructure for a pervasive Wi-Fi solution in the future? And that could be as simple as ensuring that you've got access hatches in corridor spaces or enough infrastructure in the basement and the ducts coming into the building to be able to provide for that type of technology. Will it enable more devices? Sure, yeah, absolutely. And not just from a building level, but if you think on a consumer level, we're up to about, I think it's 7 connected devices each, which I thought was a lot, but actually when you think of your watch, your phone, your laptop, your tablet, your TV, suddenly you've got 5, and then you only need a couple more before you're into 7 to 10 devices. So yeah, pervasive Wi-Fi will be a really critical enabler for future tech, not just at a building level, but at a consumer level.
Yeah, yeah.
Can I just jump in on that as well? Because, and this is, and Tim will hopefully, and Henry will definitely know what I'm saying here. I don't know whether I'm pronouncing this right even, but what I know from our perspective, we have obviously pervasive Wi-Fi across our developments, but funnily enough, Utopia, for example, so our IoT doesn't run off Wi-Fi. It runs off something called, and Henry, you might have to correct me on how I pronounce this, LoRaWAN. So basically, it's a secure IoT network. And the point is that lots of, or the majority of, I believe, IoT devices actually don't run off Wi-Fi. It's more kind of integrating of building systems that all run on the Wi-Fi network. So CCTV, access control, BMs, etc. So I don't know whether that's helpful or not, but from a smart IoT perspective, it's not necessarily.
I'm thoroughly impressed, not just with the technical ability, which seemingly is greater or more advanced than mine, but being only so new to this role that I think we will start coming to you for tech advice in the future, Lucy. Building, yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is all connectivity. I think Wi-Fi or integrated networks or landlord-owned networks are becoming more of a thing. I think landlord-owned networks or Internet of Thing networks need to be specifically provisioned in a building. Frankly, we haven't seen enough of it. It's something which the commercial market were alive to 2-3 years ago. So it's great to start seeing that come through from a residential perspective, and obviously Moda taking quite a forward-thinking approach to a lot of their technology. It doesn't surprise me that you're thinking about it already.
Yeah, and 5G has been discussed in the same way, of just sort of buildings talking to each other, talking to transport, just always on. And you're quite right. A lot of the IoT sensors that we have, like the disruptive technologies ones, these are picked up from a MIPIM stand from a year or two ago, little dummy ones. They can't run on Wi-Fi because they're maybe at a very remote factory somewhere, and they've got to monitor whether that window has been closed or not. So it's not reliable to have that. So it runs off cellular, off a very the sort of low end of that doesn't take up too much energy. So is 5G something you track as well, Henry?
Yeah, yes, we do. We've got an R&D team that's looking quite specifically at 5G. I think the common misconception about 5G is that once 5G comes, we'll be able to do away with all this fiber that comes into into our buildings, and it'll all just kind of exist in the cloud. I used to work in government. When people talk about the cloud, they all look up and make kind of cloud shape things with their hands. The thing about 5G, I guess, is that about 90% of all wireless connections are wired. So what we will expect to see in buildings is not a removal of a lot of the fiber. It'll be more fiber, more technology in the basement. And so the types of things we look for from a certification perspective is, how well provisioned is your telecom room in your building? Is it provisioned a bit like a mini data center? Because that's where all of your really important technology is going to go. So you want to make sure that your designer is thinking about flood protection, cooling, enough capacity, enough power, like going to that minutiae of detail, because ultimately that's what's going to drive the residents' experience in the future. The worst telecom rooms we see are like in a car park. I actually did see a guy going around right next to a set of servers with a pressure washer, which is just about the worst two pieces of equipment you can have next to each other. So making sure the foundations of the building are provisioned for technology is going to be the best way of being able to assure that user experience in the future, no matter what the technology is.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's great. Thank you. And time for a couple more questions before we wrap and go to networking. Something that has come up quite a bit through our events so far this season has been around lessons learned from COVID and things that might become permanent changes, which I guess runs through everything we've been talking about today. James, maybe start with you. Have you sort of seen changes either in your own business or those that you're talking to where things they've learned from the last 6 months are going to become permanent, and we'll see them really bed in over the next year?
Yes. So essentially, one of the key things that I would say it's at the forefront of everybody's mind now is the affordability element and the affordability piece. If you look historically back to the financial services, back in the day when you could just walk up to the bank to get a mortgage, for example, and all they'll do is just run a credit check and ask you how much you earn. Post the 2009 financial crisis, you had a situation where a large number of people ended up defaulting or were over leveraged beyond what they could afford. Now, what's happened now is a situation where within a rental residential space, we are, I wouldn't say heading in that direction as a result of the end of the furlough scheme, but that risk has now significantly blown up for a lot of landlords, and this can be seen in the risk premium people are paying for the rent guarantee cover. So the affordability question about whether people can actually, whether people have the financial ability and financial wellness to be able to afford some of the property that they are actually moving into, it is now something that we will be definitely seeing more of a trend of going forward. Open banking will be one of the biggest pieces that we'll be seeing within the residential space, both for lettings and for sales, just to verify that people can actually afford a transaction before commenting it and actually wasting everybody else's time. So for me, those would be the two things that I definitely see staying within the residential lettings and sales space. Open banking and affordability check will be very, very, very much at the forefront of everybody's mind.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Victoria, can I put the same question to you about lessons learned that might become permanent?
I think for my clients, it's going to be particularly the reassessment of work-life balance and work-life location, and also things done as simple as, we've obviously the drive in the last sort of 10, 15, 20 years to more open plan living, but actually where you've got everyone all in one place working and doing things that might not be the way forward necessarily, that people will want to have an office that they can go and do their 4 days work there, perhaps the 2-3 days that they were doing in an office environment, they want to do in a home office, but they also want to close the door on that and be able to actually then be home. Rather than, I imagine, what a lot of us are doing, of having sort of laptops and things all over it, merging those two environments. So sort of creating spaces that give those people that division, I think, will be a way forward for us.
Yeah, all those cool garden offices that we all want, that we see. Lucy.
Yes, sure. I mean, from our perspective, undoubtedly, COVID is resulting in a fundamental change in the way people are viewing their home. So as I mentioned before, I think it's in excess of 85% of employees that are intending to work from home at least once a week, more than once a week, and that was from JLL research. But in terms of kind of how we're viewing it, with more people working and spending time in their homes, residents are demanding more workspace, more access to outdoor space, more community space, but also obviously, as I mentioned before, crucial and very much representative of our brand is the wellbeing provision. So I think we've always been ahead of the curve on the wellbeing side of things, and that's something obviously in the commercial space is major and has been a mega thing pre-pandemic. But top quality communal space is already at the heart of obviously what we do. Residents are benefiting from communal lounges, co-working, cinema rooms, dining rooms, etc. The popularity of this is increasing. I think the way that we're viewing it is, if we had been able to look ahead at what was coming with hindsight, where would you be living? And I know that, so many people, and certainly in terms of the increase in demand of our residential spaces, that people are looking for a new way of living. And we're trying to work hard to facilitate and continue to create inclusive communities within our developments, and making sure that we're innovating and evolving and not saying this works now instead going, what is going to work in the future and what is important, what's vital for people to feel that they have everything they need under one roof, should there be another lockdown. And technology obviously is absolutely at the forefront of all of those thoughts.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I guess a lot of the losers on the flip side are with those developers that aren't asking themselves those questions and aren't trying to innovate and deliver what people need. Henry, last but not least, waiting patiently, give us your thoughts.
I've had enough time to think, so hopefully my answer will be cogent at least. So I think, like, from a residential perspective, like the way I see our clients adapting, I guess, is three things. Our clients are, first of all, as I said earlier, doubling down on connectivity, not just making sure that their residents can access resilient connectivity today, but also thinking about their connectivity needs in the future, particularly around mobile. The second thing I think is looking at how they can enable user experiences through technology and taking a more user-centered approach to technology. Often more technology is not better technology. And I think developers are being much more selective and holistic about the way they enable those experiences through their building, and actually having much more empathy, I think, with the end user than they ever have before. That's kind of the opportunity, if you like, of build to rent. And then the final thing is, I guess, preparing for the future. Like, we don't know what the next big change is, and all of our clients are starting to think about how they can build buildings which are as flexible as possible to be able to adapt to whatever technology comes down the line in the next 5 or 10 years, which becomes the difference between somebody moving into their building or somebody moving into the building next door.
Yeah. No, that's brilliant. Thank you very much. Very cogent, as you said. Indeed. Thanks, everyone. Give yourselves a round of applause where you are, and join in at home or in the office or wherever you are if you wish. That was brilliant. I think we really got an insight into what's coming, where we are now, what the future is going to look like. Hopefully for everyone watching, that was useful and interesting. As well as the market intelligence today, we've still got some time for networking, so the other room will be open for another half an hour. Feel free to dive in there and find the person you wanted to speak to and wander around the tables. And thanks again to our wonderful partners today delivering this PlaceTech event with us, Bruntwood Works, Node, Mills & Reeve and Morecom. The next PlaceTech event will be on the future of retail and leisure, and that's on the 23rd of October. Do check out the website for more details and how to register. And for now, I will see you in the networking and give that another whirl. Thanks, everyone.